This is the story of the Brontës, the world's most famous literary sisters, Charlotte, Anne, and Emily. Their father, the Reverend Patrick Brontë, had brought his young family to Haworth in 1820. But within months of their arrival, his wife died, leaving him to bring up his 6 children alone, 2 of whom died of consumption. The surviving children took refuge in a world of make-believe, creating fantasies that would later inspire their novels. But as they grew up, all of Patrick Bronte's children found it difficult to deal with reality, Branwell in particular. Charlotte and Emily went to study in Brussels, where Charlotte fell hopelessly in love with her married professor, Monsieur Eyre. Then Branwell embarked on a disastrous, doomed affair with his employer's wife, Lydia Robinson. By 1844, the family had lived through many trials and tribulations, but they had no idea of the tragedy that was to come. Emily Brontë had returned from Brussels and loved being home again, where she could spend hours on the moors composing poetry. But the rest of the family was in turmoil. At Thorpe Green, Branwell, ignoring the cloud of suspicion that hung over him, continued his affair with Mrs. Robinson. Her husband had fallen ill, and she hinted that soon she might be free to marry again. Anne Brontë, the Robinsons' governess, disgusted by their behavior, gave in her notice. Passions were also simmering at the Eyre school in Brussels, and Charlotte had faced terrible humiliation when her love for Monsieur Eyre had been discovered by his wife.
My heart almost died within me. Miserable longings strained its chords. Even to look forward was not to hope. The future spoke no comfort. Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you? You think wrong.
The younger son gathered all together, and when he had spent all, there rose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want.
Patrick Brontë was going blind. In his old age, he looked back on these troubled times with deep sadness.
In those days, I could no longer read or write or even walk unaided. When my children needed me the most, I myself was as helpless as a child.
Anne kept Branwell's guilty secret from her father. When she returned, she and Emily retreated into the safety of their childhood world of Gondal, acting out new adventures in the lives of their soldier heroes.
There was so much death at the siege of Tindarum.
So much.
And there he lay, among the bloom.
His red blood dyed a darker hue, shuddering to feel the ghostly gloom that coming death around him threw.
We have to escape from the Republicans. I am Henry Angora.
And I, Cordelia Fitzofnold.
Charlotte came home heartbroken and threw herself into her plan to set up a school in the parsonage. She longed for a letter from Monsieur Eyre, and a visit from Branwell only increased her heartache.
I have been dismissed by Robinson.
He threatens to expose you if you ever try to contact his family again. Branwell, what shame have you brought on us now?
Lydia Robinson loves me. There is no shame in love.
She's a married woman. You must know that you can never be together. You must be strong. Forget her. Find another position and earn some money.
I shall earn some money, Charlotte. I shall write a novel.
How will that help us?
Charlotte, a novel is the most saleable article in the world. I shall expect at least £200 for my manuscript, and its completion will while away the days until Lydia can be mine.
You are a fool. Find something sensible to do and stick to it.
What do you know of true love, Charlotte?
Dear Monsieur Eyre, I have tried to forget you, for the remembrance of a person one will never see again exhausts the spirit too much. And when one has suffered that kind of anxiety for 1 or 2 years, one is ready to do anything to find peace once more.
Love triangles also played a part in Branwell's novel. Entitled "And the Weary Are at Rest," he reworked a childhood story about his soldier hero, the Earl of Northumberland. It was a romance, and now the hero lived out the author's dream of being united with his mistress. Charlotte knew that they couldn't expect their ailing father to support them forever. Advertisements for the Brontë sisters' school had failed to attract any pupils, and unless they could find a way to earn some money, they faced the dreadful prospect of becoming governesses again.
One day, I accidentally lighted on a notebook of verse in my sister Emily's handwriting. They were poems from her fantasy world of Gondor, and not at all like the poetry women generally write. They were terse and vigorous and had a wild, elevating music.
Cold in the earth, and the deep snow piled above thee. Far, far removed, cold in the dreary grave. Have I forgot my only love, to love thee, severed at last by time's all-severing wave?
What are you doing? Emily, how dare you? That's my private writing case.
Emily's verses are wonderful.
Gondor belongs to me and Anne, not to you.
You should be published.
Shame on you.
Have you no spark of ambition?
The quarrel rumbled on for days, until Emily reluctantly agreed to publication, but only on condition that Charlotte and Anne publish their poems as well, and that they all used pen names to hide their identities.
I think The world would take our poems more seriously if they thought we were men.
I'm so sorry to disturb you. I was looking for your father.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bell-Nichols. I haven't seen him for at least the last hour. Emily? No.
Well, if you'll excuse me.
I have it. My father's curate, Arthur Bell-Nichols, inadvertently played his part in our search for pen names. Mine was to be Currer Bell, Anne's was to be Acton Bell, and Emily's Ellis Bell.
What about Branwell?
I think you'll find Branwell has his own plans for publication. This will be our secret venture. I've chosen Aylott and Jones to publish our poems. Dear gentlemen, if you object to publishing the work at your own risk, would you undertake it on the author's account? We used a considerable sum from Aunt Branwell's legacy to pay for the initial costs of publication, but I hoped that in the end we would make some money by it.
Excluded by his sisters, Branwell turned to his long-suffering friend, John Brown.
This novel shall be the making of me, John. It tells of a beautiful, gentle woman bound in marriage to a brute. She's in despair until she meets Alexander Percy, the Earl of Northumberland. I'll read some to you. Maria Thurston had known enough of sorrow in her marriage, but God had intended her to both know and feel enough of love. Percy stands before her, a man capable of exciting every feeling that a woman can know.
I don't suppose it was Percy's got out to do with you, is he?
John.
My son, walk not thou in the way with them. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. My son, walk not thou in the way with them.
Patrick now struggled to perform his parish duties and keep the roof over his children's heads.
My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from them.
He had no idea that his daughters had plans to make money through their writing, let alone that their first book had finally been published.
It's full of misprints. Look. They've put tumbling stars instead of trembling stars. It makes a nonsense of the whole poem.
We are published authors. Last. But if our book is going to sell, it must be noticed. I shall forward another £2 to Aylott and Jones so they can send review copies to all the best periodicals.
We can ill afford such a sum.
It's not an expenditure, it's an investment.
But Charlotte was wrong. The reviewers were more interested in the identity of the mysterious Bell brothers than in the work itself. Their book of poems sold 2 copies. Their brothers' dreams were fading fast.
Branwell had become hopeless, incapable of filling any respectable station in life. Even his plan to make money by a novel had come to nothing. But I began to wonder whether Emily and Anne and I should try our hands at a novel. After all, we had been writing stories since childhood.
Determined this time to write something that would sell, Charlotte abandoned the fantasy themes of childhood and made a first unsteady attempt to base a novel on real life.
My story is to be called The Professor. It is about a young man who goes to work as a teacher in Brussels. He labours throughout life, enjoys only a mixed and moderate cup of happiness.
It was written from a male point of view and was stilted and artificial. Her sisters, however, wrote from the heart.
My heroine is a plain parson's daughter called Agnes Grey. She is the youngest in the family and will surprise everyone by becoming a governess to try and save the family's fortunes. At last it was decreed that I should take charge of the young family of a certain Mrs. Bloomfield. Her husband had realized a very comfortable fortune, but could not be prevailed upon to give a greater salary than £25 to the instructress of his children.
You can't tell me what to do. You're just the governess. I hate you.
Anne's novel rang true because it was based on her own unhappy experiences. But Emily either could not or would not abandon the themes and characters of her fantasy world of Gondal, and she simply transported a violent childhood tale of passion and revenge to a rural Yorkshire setting.
My novel is called Wuthering Heights. Let me in, or I will make you repent, Gurned Heathcliff. If I were you, I'd go stretch myself over Cathy's grave and die like a faithful dog. I can't imagine how you think of surviving her loss. I was unnerved by terror when Heathcliff flung himself on Earnshaw's weapon and wrenched it from his grasp. The charge exploded. And the knife closed into its owner's wrist. Heathcliff pulled it away by main force, slitting up the flesh and thrust it dripping into his pocket. His adversary had fallen senseless with pain. The ruffian kicked and trampled on him and dashed his head repeatedly against the flags.
While the sisters were busy with their novels, some long-awaited news roused Branwell from his depression.
Brandy. John, have some brandy. This calls for a celebration. You see before you the happiest philosopher that ever lived.
What's happened then?
He's dead. Isn't it wonderful? Providence has smiled on us.
Who's dead?
Robinson. I know not how and care less. Before long, I shall be the husband of the lady whom I love best in all the world. A toast to the philosopher and his future bride. And another, that when I marry, I might be a gentleman of leisure and devote myself to poetry.
Poetry.
It took the sisters only 2 months to finish their novels, and they sent them off with new hope of finding fame and fortune. A sudden summons to the Black Bull from Mrs. Robinson's coachman sent Branwell into ecstasy.
This was his moment. He was convinced that in a day or so he'd be back with his Lydia. He stayed with that coachman for 2 hours, and then landlord sent for me. Something had started to burn up inside him, fierce like. He was having some kind of fit. The coachman told him Robinson's will said if his wife ever saw Branwell again, she'd inherit nothing. I took him back to parsonage, and it were my last Martha, parson's maid, who had to look after him.
My pa found out later it was all a lie. Her husband's will said no such thing. Mrs. Robinson had made it all up. Went 5 minutes before she went off and married a wealthy relative. But our Branwell, He was broken, heart and mind.
My son had broken the seventh commandment and was being punished on earth for his sin, but 'twas that woman tempted him, and she would reap her reward in hell.
Either to ease her conscience or to buy his silence, Mrs. Robinson continued to send Branwell money. He squandered it all on drink, weakening his already fragile health, until his sisters lost all patience. Charlotte's hopes for their novels had been dashed. Finally, an unscrupulous publisher called Thomas Courtly Newby offered to print them at the girl's expense. He demanded the sum of £50, nearly £2,000 in today's money. Emily and Anne agreed, but Charlotte parcelled up her manuscript for the 7th time and sent it to Smith Elder and Company.
These were mournful days. Papa's cataracts had become so bad that he was almost helpless. I decided that Emily and I would go to Manchester to find an eye surgeon who could perform the new and delicate operation needed to restore his sight.
Patrick's cataract operation was carried out before the days of anaesthetic. The old man sat patient and firm for 15 minutes of excruciating pain while they removed the complete lens from his eye. After the ordeal, Patrick was ordered to lie quietly for a month to prevent bleeding. Charlotte stayed to nurse him, but while Patrick prayed silently for the restoration of his sight, she found the time hung heavily on her hands.
I had a raging toothache and could neither sleep nor eat, so I took up a pencil and paper and sought refuge in my writing. I imagined an orphan child, and I called her Jane Eyre. She becomes a governess and falls in love with her employer, Mr. Rochester.
In writing Jane Eyre, Charlotte released all the pent-up passion that had tortured her soul for 4 years. Like Monsieur Eyre, Mr. Rochester was married. But unlike Charlotte, Jane Eyre's love was requited.
I love you as my own flesh. I entreat you. Jane, I must have you for my own. Entirely my own.
Jane flees the agonizing temptation of her love for a married man. Returning later, she finds he has been blinded in a fire that has killed his secret wife, leaving them free to marry at last.
Jane,
I'm coming back to you.
Such dreams I've had at night when I've clasped her to my heart as I do now and kissed her.
Through divine mercy and skill of the surgeon, after a year of nearly total blindness, I was able to read and write and find my way without a guide. The restoration of my sight was a miracle. And I prayed for another to save my son from his torment.
While Branwell pined for Mrs. Robinson, Charlotte was appalled to hear gossip that Arthur Bell Nichols was pining for her.
Never was rumour more unfounded. A cold, far-away sort of civility are the only terms on which I have ever been with Mr. Nichols.
Mr. Bell Nichols?
He and his fellow curates regard me as an old maid, and I regard them, one and all, as narrow and unattractive specimens of the coarser sex.
Mr. Bell Nichols
She was more worried about her fictional romance.
Smith Elder had rejected the professor, but they discussed its faults and merits so kindly and with such courteousness that I take more pleasure in their refusal than in a thoughtless acceptance. They say a new work in 3 volumes will meet with their careful attention. I'm sending them Jane Eyre.
Well, I hope you have more success than we have had with Newby. We've heard nothing from him, have we, since we sent him all that money?
After breakfast, on a Sunday morning, I took the manuscript of Jane Eyre and began to read it. The story quickly took me captive. Presently, the servant came to say luncheon was ready. I asked him for a sandwich and a glass of wine and still went on with Jane Eyre. A hasty dinner followed, and before the night was out, I had finished that extraordinary novel.
On the 19th of October, 1847, Jane Eyre was published to instant acclaim.
Jane Eyre is a book to make the pulses gallop and the heart beat and to fill the eyes with tears. The figures are bold, true, well-defined, full of life. Mr. Currabell possesses narrative power in an uncommon degree.
Jane Eyre combines masculine hardness, coarseness, and freedom of expression with a heathenist doctrine of religion.
Despite, or perhaps because of the mixed reviews, Jane Eyre was a runaway success and was rapidly reprinted. The eminent author William Makepeace Thackeray was full of praise.
I am honoured to be approved by Mr. Thackeray, but I think it's time I told Papa about Jane Eyre.
Charlotte, I have been reading your book. I think it's a better book than I expected. Don't stay up too late now, girls.
Thank you, Papa.
In a bid to exploit the success of one of the Bell brothers, Emily and Anne's publisher, Thomas Courtly Newby, had finally brought out Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey.
Agnes Grey is a sort of younger sister to Jane Eyre. It teaches us to put every trust in supreme wisdom and goodness.
Wuthering Heights is wild, confused, disjointed, and improbable. Vulgar depravity and unnatural horrors. The people are savages.
The violence and amorality in Wuthering Heights caused a sensation. Charlotte was deeply hurt by the critics' attacks on her sister, but Emily paid no heed. To her publisher's delight, she started work on a second novel. Anne also began another novel, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, a story fired by her horror at Branwell's adulterous affair and decline into alcoholism. It was a dark tale which depicted the destructive effects of drink and loose morals on the young, and the efforts of a good woman to protect her son.
So my little Arthur came down every evening and learned to tipple wine like Papa,
She smelt it.
to swear and to have his own way like a man, and sent Mamma to the devil when she tried to prevent him.
Arthur!
Branwell had begged me to bring him 5 pence of gin to get him through night. Pitiful they were. Parson did what he could. Never stopped hoping the boy would find himself again. But his sisters had given up on him.
Meanwhile, Thomas Courtly Newby had tried to sell The Tenant of Wildfell Hall to an American publisher, claiming that it was by the author of Jane Eyre.
We must all go to London immediately to prove to my publisher that we have no part in Newby's fraud. Hurry. We don't have much time if we have to catch the train from Keighley. Emily?
Mr. Smith will have to make do with Currer and Acton Bell. Ellis has no desire to go to London.
On the 8th of July, 1848, Charlotte and Anne arrived at the London offices of George Smith.
We were dressed in the plain country garments which were the only ones we possessed. I smiled at the contrast between me and Mr. Smith.
How can I help?
My name is Charlotte Brontë. You may know me as Cora Bell. And this is my sister Anne, Acton Bell. If you would like proof of our identities, you may recognize this letter that you sent to me only last week.
How extraordinary.
Explanations, talk. Tonight you must go to the Italian Opera. You must see the exhibition. Mr. Thackeray would be pleased to see you. Talk, until I offered a grave explanation that no one was to know the true identity of the Bell brothers. Mr. Smith did not like the quiet plan, but consented. He made himself altogether very pleasant.
I must confess, my first impression of Charlotte Bronte's personal appearance was it was interesting rather than attractive. She was very small and had a quaint, old-fashioned look. Her head seemed too big for her body, but she had fine eyes. She seemed to have an excessive anxiety about her appearance. I believe she would have given all of her genius to have been beautiful.
Charlotte's correspondence with George Smith took a new turn, and through their letters, the couple began to fall in love. But Branwell's hopes for happiness had long since vanished. On September the 23rd, 1848, he walked into Haworth for the last time.
John, in all my past life, I've done nothing, either great or good.
It was a consumption, brought on by years of abuse. Too much drinking, not eating properly. He knew it were coming. In his room I saw one of his drawings. It showed him asleep with death beckoning to him.
My pa was heartbroken, and he blamed himself for not stopping him drinking. But Branwell was so young, you know, just gone 30. Well, we'd all had such high hopes for him.
O Lord, give him unfeigned repentance for the errors of his life past, and steadfast faith in thy Son Jesus, that his sins may be done away by thy mercy, and his pardon sealed in heaven before he go hence, and be no more seen.
I myself, with painful, mournful joy, heard my brother praying softly in his dying moments.
My son. My son.
The removal of our only brother must be regarded as a mercy. I do not weep from a sense of bereavement, but for the wreck of talent. Nothing remains of him but a memory of errors and sufferings.
And so Branwell's name was added to the Brontë family plaque, beneath those of the mother and sisters he had lost in childhood. Consumption was to continue its relentless assault on the family. When Emily fell ill, the sisters struggled to hope against hope that she would recover, and even managed to find some amusement in the critics' wilder speculations about the Bell brothers.
These Bells are obsessed with the coarse and the profane. Ellis Bell is a man of uncommon talents, but dogged, brutal, and morose. Acton Bell revels in inconceivably coarse language, revolting scenes, most connected with the more animal portion of our nature, the epitome of brutality. Lady readers should not peruse it. Devils dance and wolves howl. I studied these two ferocious authors. The brutal and morose Ellis drew his impeded breath, looking piteously pale and wasted. Acton was sewing and smiled to hear his character so darkly portrayed. How I laugh in my sleeve at these solemn reviewers. Please sit down and rest.
Let me fetch the doctor.
I'll not see any poisoning doctors. Or take their medicines.
Emily made haste to leave us. Physically, she perished, but mentally, she grew stronger than we had ever known her.
No coward soul is mine. No trembler in the world's storm-troubled sphere. There is not room for death, nor atom that his might could render void, since thou art being and breath, and what thou art may never be destroyed.
Here lying under thy hand in great weakness of body, look graciously upon her, O Lord.
On the 19th of December, 1848, 3 months after the death of Branwell, my dear sister Emily died.
Be comforted. She died knowing that Christ is her Saviour, and heaven her eternal home.
The anguish of her suffering is gone. No need now to tremble for the hard frost and keen wind. Emily feels them no more. The truth is that amongst some other unjust prejudices, at which I have already hinted, within weeks of Emily's death, Anne too was diagnosed with consumption. I thought my heart would break. The Marquis had contracted a horror mingled with contempt.
Forgive my intrusion, but... Well, I thought you might like to see this. It's the latest copy of Blackwood's magazine, in which they have published a new poem by a certain Acton Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols.
Well, Miss Anne, Miss Brontë.
Oh, thou hast taken my delight and hope of... and hope of life away, and bid me watch the painful night and wait the weary day.
Take courage, Charlotte. courage. Charlotte, take me to Scarborough. I long to see the sea again. I have such happy memories of staying there when I was a governess. It will do me more good than all these medicines.
You are too unwell to travel. We will go when you feel stronger.
I will not be troublesome, Charlotte. There is no time to be lost. I'm ready to go now, Papa.
God bless you, my child.
Look after yourself while I'm away.
I knew it would be the last time that I should see her upon this earth.
I have no horror of death, but I wish it would please God to spare me, not only for Papa and Charlotte's sakes, but because I long to do some good in the world before I leave it. I have many schemes in my head, humble and limited indeed, but still I should not like to have lived to so little purpose. God's will be done.
Anne died 4 days after our arrival, and I buried her there at Scarborough. She rests quietly in the graveyard of St. Mary's Church, on the cliff overlooking the sea.
Within the space of 9 months, Patrick Brontë had lost 3 more of his beloved children.
Dear Mr. Smith, if a prophet had warned me how I should stand in June 1849, I should have thought this can never be endured. It is over. Branwell, Emily, Anne are gone like dreams. Gone as Maria and Elizabeth went 20 years ago. Papa has only me now. The weakest, puniest, least promising of his 6 children. Consumption has taken the whole 5. Still, I have some strength to fight the battle of life. Labour is the only radical cure for rooted sorrow.
Charlotte found some comfort in writing her new novel, Shirley.
Lonely as I am, how should I be if Providence had never given me the courage to adopt a career? I wish every woman in England had such hope and motive in their lives. But I know there are many old maids who have neither.
I decided to invite her back to London. Perhaps a change of scene and a change of air would lighten her spirits. I was determined that a woman of her talents should no longer walk invisible.
I knew that Mr. Thackeray and Mrs. Gaskell were eager to meet this new star of the literary scene. The revelation of the true identity of Cara Bell would be Charlotte Bronte's passport to society.
When Mr. Thackeray entered the room and I looked up and saw his tall figure and heard his voice, the whole incident was truly dreamlike. But he is very ugly indeed.
There was an odd, impetuous honesty about Charlotte Bronte. I was touched by the sight of her trembling little frame, her little hands, her great, truthful eyes.
Mrs. Gaskell showed much interest and looked kind enough.
She was altogether plain, but sterling and true, if a little bitter. But the wonder to me was how she can have kept heart and power alive in her life of desolation.
Gradually, the world learned the truth about the mysterious Cara Bell. The provincial parson's daughter, who had dreamt of fame since childhood, had succeeded at last.
Charlotte Bronte. Oh, my daughter's name was known everywhere.
With great pride, her father sent copies of her books to his family in Ireland. He also began to cherish hopes that his famous daughter's friendship with George Smith might blossom into an engagement.
But even in the midst of Charlotte's success, I still mourn the talents of my other children. But they'd been taken from me in their prime.
But Emily's masterpiece, Wuthering Heights, might not have been her only gift to posterity. Her publisher, Thomas Courtly Newby, was still expecting the manuscript of her second novel.
Dear Ellis Bell, I shall have great pleasure in making arrangements for your next novel. I think you are quite right not to let it go before the world until you are well satisfied with it. I shall therefore have pleasure in accepting it, in your own time.
I could not bear to think of the critics attacking Emily's character again. I would rather die myself than give them the opportunity.
The content of Emily's second novel will remain one of the great literary mysteries. The world can only wonder what her extraordinary talent might have produced, and question the real reasons for the disappearance of her manuscript. Charlotte's fourth novel, Villette, was well underway. It is a love story with an unexpected ending.
Yes?
Miss Bronte, Miss Bronte. Miss Bronte, I'm certain that it cannot have escaped your notice that I am. That is, my feelings for you are of a...
Like lightning, it flashed on me what was coming. Shaking from head to foot, looking deadly pale and speaking low yet with difficulty, he proposed.
I have suffered for months and I can stay silent no longer.
Have you spoken to Papa?
No, I dare not. Miss Bronte. Charlotte, pray. Give me some hope.
Charlotte.
Father, I can hardly believe what has happened.
What is it?
Mr. Bell Nichols has made me an offer of marriage.
I'll not have another man in this house. How dare he? If you marry anyone, I shall expect you to choose someone more deserving of you than that unmanly driveller.
Very well. You shall have my refusal in the morning.
Patrick, like Charlotte, still entertained secret hopes that one day she might marry the well-connected George Smith, whose letters had been such a comfort.
My dear Miss Bronte, I am thinking of taking the most important step in life, and with every prospect of happiness.
George Smith was to marry the daughter of a wealthy wine merchant.
My destiny will not be brilliant, and my own illusions of ambition are gone. I am no longer young, and I never was pretty. And I know that there are not many men who would serve 7 years for me.
Charlotte now looked with new eyes at the companionship offered by her father's curate.
I could no longer maintain my opposition to the match. If truth be told, I thought she deserved better than a poor country parson like her father.
I am still very calm, very inexpectant. What I taste of happiness is of the soberest order. I trust that I will love my husband. I am grateful for his tender love for me. I believe him to be an affectionate and high-principled man. Providence offers me this destiny. Doubtless, then, it is best for me.
I have written a letter to my aunt.
Oh, yes.
I thought we might visit my family after the wedding.
As you wish, Arthur.
Patrick claimed he felt too unwell to attend her wedding. So, with none of her family present, it was, as with her heroine Jane Eyre, a simple ceremony.
Rita, I married him. A quiet wedding we had. My husband has been described as a consistent Christian and a kind gentleman. To merit and win such a character is better than to earn wealth or fame or power.
Finding new pleasure as a country parson's wife, Charlotte willingly put aside her writing.
In the Royal Gallery of France resembled greatly those of which he had tired. What's wrong, my dear?
It's nothing, Arthur. Oh. I'm just tired. It's not time to fuss. Go on reading.
Presently, as if to convince himself he had now belonged not to the cell, but to the world.
Well, would you believe it? Miss Charlotte was going to have a baby. We was all so excited. I started looking in the cellar for their old cradle. Parson was as pleased as Punch. When she started to get sick, we all thought it would pass. She couldn't hold anything down, though. Not even broth or weak tea.
My sufferings are very great. My nights indescribable, sickness with scarce a reprieve. As to my husband, my heart is knit to him. He is so tender, so good, helpful, patient.
I'm not going to die, am I? He wouldn't separate us. Not when we've been so happy.
Hush.
Charlotte had escaped consumption, but chronic morning sickness brought on by pregnancy was now wasting her away.
I had ceased to hope against hope. For I had seen so many of my family removed to that place where hope and fear fluctuate no more.
Oh, Father of mercies, and God of all comfort, our only help in time of need, we fly unto thee for succor on behalf of this, thy servant here, lying under thy hand in great weakness of body. Look graciously upon her, O Lord.
At Charlotte's funeral, the church and the churchyard were crowded. Tributes poured in from those who had known her and those who had read and loved her books. The revered poet Matthew Arnold wrote a poem in her honor, which her father would treasure for the rest of his life.
Strew with roses the grave of the early dying, alas. Early she goes on the path to the silent country and leaves half her laurels unwon, dying too soon. Yet green laurels she had, and a course short, but redoubled by fame.